Shri Guru Hari Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Namah Shri Yadhirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swami Neta Paharine.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. On behalf of everyone, I offer my humble pranams at the lotus feet of Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Sharada Mata and Swami Vivekananda. I also offer my pranams to revered Swami Shuddhidanandaji Maharaj, President, Ramakrishna Math, Basavanagudi, Bengaluru. I warmly welcome our beloved Swami Shuddhidanandaji Maharaj, Warden of Sri Ramakrishna Vidyarthi Mandiram, and Swami Anilayanandaji Maharaj, Assistant Warden of Sri Ramakrishna Vidyarthi Mandiram, to ongoing Knowledge is Power lecture series, organized by Sri Ramakrishna Vidyarthi Mandiram, a unit of Ramakrishna Math, Basavanagudi, Bengaluru. Sri Ramakrishna Vidyarthi Mandiram is a modern Gurukula started in 1943 by most revered Swami Shuddhidanandaji Maharaj. I am so glad to be a part of this organization which exposes students to the thoughts of Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother Sharada Devi and Swami Vivekananda, along with the thoughts of many Swamijis, resource persons, scientists and many other new upcoming avenues. Now I welcome today's speaker Swami Shuddhidanandaji Maharaj, President Advaita Ashrama, Kolkata and Mayavati, Uttarakhand, who is going to give a talk on Advaita Ashrama, Advaita Vedanta and Swami Vivekananda. Swamiji has already given lectures in Knowledge is Power series on 2 occasions. First time the topic was Lessons from Upanishads and second time on the topic True Nationalism. Now I like to give a small introduction about Swamiji. Swami Shuddhidanandaji Maharaj is a monk of the Ramakrishna order started by Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. He joined the order at Ramakrishna Math, Pune in 1993. Initiated by revered Swami Ranganathanandaji Maharaj, he took his monastic vows in 2003. In 1999, he was posted to Advaita Ashrama and in 2019, he became the president of that center. During the 22 years of his service at Advaita Ashrama, Maharaj has been involved in the publication of several important works dealing with the Vedanta, Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. He has been the chief editor of number of important books like The Message of Viveka Chudamani, The Message of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Western Admirers of Sri Ramakrishna and his disciples, Swami Vivekananda as the Turning Point, Hinduism, The Faith Eternal, and many other books. His special area of interest is the philosophies of Vedanta and Yoga, and also Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. As we look at the brief introduction of Advaita Ashrama, Advaita Ashrama is a unique center envisioned by Swami Vivekananda himself. Advaita Ashrama is also one of the premier publication centers of the Ramakrishna Math and the mission. Main center of Advaita Ashrama is located at the foothills of Himalayas, Mayavati, Uttarakhand, which was started in 1899 under the inspiration of Swami Vivekananda. Advaita Ashrama publishes many important books in both English and Hindi languages, as well as the monthly English journal Prabuddha Bharata, which is spreading the spiritual nectar of Sri Ramakrishna movement, the powerful ideas of Vedanta and the insights of Indian values and culture. Prabuddha Bharata also brings inspirational reading material on the wide variety of topics of global interest. In 2021, the journal has reached its 125th year. To commemorate this important milestone, Advaita Ashrama conducted a YouTube event on 21st January 2021, in which our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji also took part. I kindly suggest our viewers to watch that event on official YouTube channel of Advaita Ashrama. With this brief introduction, I hand over this virtual platform to Revered Swamiji. Over to you, Maharaj.
Atmanamekam jagatbijamadyam niriham nirakaram omkarvedyam yato jayate palyate yena vishvam tamisham bhaje liyate yatra vishvam. Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukhasvarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Dear Swami Shuddhidanandaji Maharaj and all my dear students, my best wishes to all of you. And today I have been invited to share my ideas on a very unique subject. The subject is one of the centers of the Ramakrishna order. So that is the reason on the surface, the subject appears to be slightly different from the usual subjects you are exposed to from time to time. Why are we focusing on this subject of one center, which is known as Advaita Ashrama? There is a very profound reason, because this center, Advaita Ashrama, is founded and it is existing for a great mission and purpose. That mission and purpose is to facilitate the practice of Advaita Vedanta and to preach the message of Advaita Vedanta. Now, naturally, the next question comes, what is this Advaita Vedanta? We shall go into this subject in a little while in more details. But at the base of this Advaita Ashrama is this profound ideology of Advaita Vedanta. And at the base of both these things, Advaita Ashrama and Advaita Vedanta, we have the greatest teacher of Advaita Vedanta in the modern times. And that is Swami Vivekananda. So that is how one is linked to the other in a very profound and inseparable manner. Advaita Ashrama is the expression of Advaita Vedanta, whose greatest teacher in the modern times was Swami Vivekananda. That's why I chose the subject of Advaita Ashrama, Advaita Vedanta, and Swami Vivekananda. Now, you all may be knowing, and if you don't know, I inform you all that this Advaita Ashrama is situated in the lap of the Himalayas, in a place called Mayavati. Now, Himalayas has got an inseparable connection with Advaita Vedanta. We can say that the Himalayas is the very birthplace of this great spiritual experience and truth. In fact, Himalayas can be said to be the birthplace of spirituality itself, as far as the human history is concerned. It is from this Deva Bhumi, which is also known as the Tyaga Bhumi or Yoga Bhumi. It is from this sacred, extremely sacred piece of area on this earth, from where has emerged all the loftiest spiritual ideas, experiences experienced by the great spiritual scientists of Bharat. They were rishis, tyagis, yogis, tapasvis. In and through their years and years of sadhana and tapasya and focused effort, they came face to face with this divine experience. Now, what this Advaita Vedanta is, this Advaita Vedanta teaches that everything is divine, that there is nothing apart from this divinity. We shall go into that subject in little details a little while later. But for the time being, let us understand that this Himalayas is the place where this great truth was discovered. And since then, from that hoary past, this great discovery has been coming down to us through a lineage of teachers and disciples. When somebody was introducing here today now, I was just listening to this introduction. Ramakrishna Vidyarthi Mandiram is a Gurukulam. Gurukulam. What a wonderful idea. This was the way our children used to be educated in India, right from the beginning of Bharatiya Samaj and Sanskriti and Sabhyata. This Guru Shishya Parampara. So in and through this Guru Shishya Parampara, this great knowledge has been coming down to us from the most ancient times, when other civilizations and cultures were not even born. This we should understand as Indians, as the representatives of the universal Hindu ideology. We should have this great pride in what we have as our own. This is the real gift of India to the entire world. The great discoveries of our ancestors, to get which the world is waiting and thirsting. Anyhow, now, this great spiritual experience, known as Advaita, it was documented. These are all experiences. They are not imaginations, and they are not something to be believed in. This has to be verified. This can be verified. It is simple science of the ultimate reality. It is the science of divinity. It is the science of one's own self, which can be verified. And this great science, just like you have books on physics, you have books on mathematics. Similarly, we have a great work which is known as Upanishads. It is in this Upanishads that this great science has been documented. The experience of these great rishis, how they discovered it, and that knowledge has been transmitted from the teachers to the disciples from the most ancient times in Indian history. So this is the importance of Himalayas. I was actually talking about Himalayas, the birthplace of this most profound, the loftiest ideology, the loftiest philosophy, the loftiest experience, the pinnacle of human thought and experience, which is known as Advaita. Human thought and experience cannot go beyond that. That is the final word. As far as our understanding about this world is concerned, and as far as our understanding about our own true nature is concerned, that is the final word. So that beautiful science is documented in these wonderful works called the Upanishads. In one of our earlier sessions, we had already discussed what is the importance of Upanishads and what we can learn from it. Anyhow, now, this is the importance of Himalayas. Now, any spiritual aspirant, anywhere in the world, he or she, because of his or her spiritual aspiration, will have a natural fascination for the Himalayas. People come to the Himalayas as a place of tourism, to have an experience of the beautiful scenery. That's one way of looking at this wonderful place. But more than that, the spiritual aspirants, for the spiritual aspirants especially, Himalayas is as if their very home. When they come to the Himalayas, they feel as if they are in the lap of divinity itself. The mind has to be ready for that, to connect oneself with the Himalayas in that fashion. So we all feel greatly attracted towards the Himalayas. Every spiritual aspirant will feel that attraction. Swami Vivekananda had a great fascination for the Himalayas. Now, when we talk about Swami Vivekananda's fascination, is it really very unusual? I don't think so. Every spiritual aspirant anywhere in the world always feels that pull of these lofty peaks. Why? These peaks, they stand for a certain idea. They represent a certain idea. And that idea is the idea of the supreme reality, the supreme divinity, which can be realized by only one way. And that way is by renunciation. Tyaga, tyaga, tyaga. These mountains, they speak of only one thing. Tyaga, tyaga, tyaga. Renunciation, renunciation, renunciation. It is the spirit of renunciation which actually reverberates in these lofty peaks. Because in and through the spirit of renunciation, the divinity begins to manifest. So Swami Vivekananda had a great fascination for the Himalayas, which found expression in his letters from time to time. In a short span of 39.5 years, especially after the passing away of his great master, the passing away of his Gurudev, Paramahamsa Sri Ramakrishna Deva, he came to the Himalayas 6 times, that is between 1888 to 1901, Swami Vivekananda came towards the Himalayas 6 times. In the short span of just 13 years, 1888 to 1901, in the short span of 13 years, in which, in fact, which was the most active portion of his life. These 13 years, especially from 1893 onwards, his life was a whirlwind. It was a stormy life. So in the midst of this stormy and highly active life, Swami Vivekananda had come to the Himalayas 6 times. It's something worth noting. The first time he walked towards the Himalayas was 2 years after Sri Ramakrishna's passing away. That was in 1888. Then again in 1890, he goes to the Himalayas. Then in 1897, that is after he returned from America. Then again in 1898, then again in 1900, and then in 1901. In this way, we find 6 times Vivekananda flying towards the Himalayas to quench that thirst for spiritual experience, to experience the bliss and the joy of being in absolute solitude. We find his desire for going towards the Himalayas expressed every now and then in his letters. We find that. And in these expeditions towards the Himalayas, there are very important points to be noted. I'll come to that a little later. The first time that we find Swami Vivekananda talking about his wish to go to the Himalayas is in his letter written to Pramadadas Mitra in 1890. In 1890, Swami Vivekananda writes a letter to Pramadadas Mitra where he says, I am longing for a flight to the Himalayas. I'm just quoting one sentence. I am longing for a flight to the Himalayas. Already his Gurudev had passed, and he was wanting to be immersed in that spiritual experience. By the grace of his Guru, already he had attained the highest spiritual experience which he wanted, that is Nirvikalpa Samadhi. But after the passing away of his Gurudev, Swami Vivekananda, every now and then, his mind used to soar towards that experience. And in order to easily reach that height, he would want to go to the Himalayas every now and then. Actually, Vivekananda was never he never wanted to be a missionary. He never wanted to be in the active field. Vivekananda was actually a man of meditation. He was a born Siddha yogi, a Siddha dhyani. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna brought him down from the Saptarishi Mandal for his mission. We all know this story. So he was a person who was adept in the art of meditation. So after this letter of 1890, next we find in 1894, Swami Vivekananda writes one letter to John Henry Wright, a beautiful letter, where Swamiji says, I was never a missionary, nor ever would be one. My place is in the Himalayas. Just imagine the most cyclonic monk, he was known as a cyclonic monk, and who led such an active life, the rarest of the rare, which we see in human history. Such a cyclonic and active person, actually, he writes and he says that I was never a missionary and I never can be one. My place is in the Himalayas. His heart always longed to be in meditation, in the silence of the meditation, in solitude, where the mind is lost, when the mind is lost to the outside world, and it is immersed in that one without second, Ekam Eva Dvitiyam, supreme reality. His mind every now and then longed to soar to those unspeakable, indescribable heights. He says, I never was a missionary and never can be one. My place is in the Himalayas. Again, in 1894, we find in one more letter to the Hale sisters, Swami Vivekananda expresses his longing to be in the Himalayas. In this way, we find in several of his letters, Swami Vivekananda expresses his deep fascination. It's just like a longing, which is not describable in and through words. Just like we long for certain things, there is an extreme vyakulata to get something. Swami Vivekananda's heart always became restless to go into these plains of solitude and silence and be lost in the world of meditation and experience of the divine reality. Now, as I said, Swami Vivekananda came towards the Himalayas 6 times in his life. And during these expeditions, especially before going to America, in 1890, I want to mention this point. In 1890, when he went towards the Himalayas, he had some profound spiritual experiences, which is very noteworthy and important, which found reflected in all his speeches which he gave in America between 1893 and 1897. It's very important. And this famous experience which he had was in Almora in 1890. You must all have heard about a place called Kakadi Ghat, which is close to Almora. In that expedition, Swami Vivekananda reached Kakadi Ghat, which is on the banks of a river. There, under a peepal tree, Swami Vivekananda got lost in meditation. And in that profound meditative state of mind, Swami Vivekananda had a very lofty spiritual experience, about which Swami Vivekananda later on mentions in a letter. He says that today I have resolved the greatest mystery of human life and existence. Dear students, I am referring to these things because these experiences which Swami Vivekananda is referring to, we should remember, these are the experiences which every human being has to aspire for. This is not something exclusive to any one person. This is meant for all of us. If we are ready, if we have that kind of a longing, anyone, anywhere can also taste the experience of this kind of a spiritual communion with the divinity. So Swami Vivekananda says that today I have resolved the greatest mystery of my life. What is that mystery? I have realized the unity, the identity between the microcosm and the macrocosm. Now, if you study the Upanishads have this one subject as its main concern: the unity between this microcosm and the macrocosm, the unity between the Jiva and the Paramatma, the unity between the individual and the universal, the identity of the Veshti and the Samashti. So Swami Vivekananda says, what did I experience? I experienced that this whole of this macrocosm, this whole of this universe which we see outside is inside this microcosm, is inside this individual. Every individual is holding this entire macrocosm inside one's own self. Can you imagine the vastness and the possibility which is waiting to come out from each and every living human being? This is the great possibility which is waiting to emerge in the receptacles of the human heart. This awakening of the sleeping soul, where we begin to experience this entire cosmos inside one's own self. So this identity between the macrocosm and the microcosm is what one of the greatest experiences which Vivekananda had in one of his expeditions towards the Himalayas in a place called Almora. And then in Almora itself, in that very expedition, there is another place called Kasar Devi. There also Swami Vivekananda had profound experiences. This Kasar Devi is a shrine dedicated to Divine Mother. It is a very powerful place, it is said, where the Divine Mother is awake. And there, Swami Vivekananda had spent several days in profound spiritual practices. And he came in touch with the spiritual reality about which he expresses at different places. In this way, we find Swami Vivekananda's deep fascination for the Himalayas. Now, let us slowly come to our main subject of Advaita Ashrama. Because before we come to Advaita Ashrama, we have to understand this Vivekananda's deep longing for the Himalayas, why he wanted one center in the Himalayas. Now, next we find Swami Vivekananda go to America. We all know 1893, that great 1893, September 11, the great event, the Chicago Parliament of Religions, about which all of you have heard much, and we are hearing, and we will keep on hearing, and this will go on for centuries together, as long as the human race, humanity itself, doesn't fully awake. Because that is the relevance of 11 September 1893 speech and all the speeches which followed that, and which was all the expression of nothing but Advaita Vedanta. So 1893, Vivekananda goes to America, and we all know what happened. Between 1893 and 1897, for almost 3.5 years, Vivekananda sowed the seeds of Hindu Sanatana Dharma's loftiest vision. That is the vision of Advaita. He sowed the seeds of this Advaita Vedanta in America. He preached about it. He preached in America. He preached in England and continental Europe. Between these 3.5 years, 2 times Vivekananda came to the continental Europe. In Europe, when he came in 1896, when he came to England, and we all know in England he had delivered his famous Jnana Yoga lectures, the mesmerizing Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga lectures, which is nothing but this Advaita ideology. This great Advaita Vedanta ideology, Vivekananda kept before the world in those totally stunning talks, which is today available to us under the title of Jnana Yoga. So in 1896, when Vivekananda came to England, in England he made 2 very great acquisitions. I would say acquisitions because these acquisitions were to become the means to further Swami Vivekananda's cause and mission. Swami Vivekananda's mission was to awaken the entire human race and also to awaken India. In this work of awakening India, he got one of his greatest acquisitions was Sister Nivedita. We all know that. And there was one more great acquisition, and that was also a couple from England, a couple whose name was they are famously known as the Savior couple. The Savior couple, whose husband's name was John Henry Savior and his wife Charlotte Elizabeth Savior. This couple, they became the disciples of Swami Vivekananda, and they gave away their everything for their Gurudev's mission, Swami Vivekananda's mission. So in 1896, we find Swami Vivekananda at that time, as I said, after his very grueling, hard work of almost 2.5 years in America and England, he was in dire need of rest. And to fulfill his need of rest, the Savior couple, along with Henrietta Mueller, they planned a trip to Switzerland at that time, in 1896. And that is how Swami Vivekananda, along with the Savior couple, the English disciples, they all come to Switzerland just for spending some days in the solitude of the Alpine mountains. You know, Switzerland is famous for its Alps, the mountain ranges which are known as Alps. And Swami Vivekananda, along with his English disciples, he comes there, and there, seeing the Alps in the midst of the Alpine mountains, Swami Vivekananda, he dreams, he envisions, and he is reminded about the great mountain peaks of his own motherland, that is the Himalayas. And he envisions, and he thinks that he should have one monastery somewhere in the Himalayan region. And this he expresses to one of his devotees who at that time stayed in Almora in India, that is to Lala Badri Shah. And he also expressed this wish to his English couple disciples, savior couple, that he wished to have one monastery in the Himalayas. That was the first time we find Swami Vivekananda explicitly talking about founding a monastery in the Himalayas. And he instructs Lala Badri Shah that I want this ashram to be in a place of so and so kind. Literally, he gives the whole description. He states that I want an ashram which should be around 7,000 feet above the sea level, which should be in the midst of all forest, greenery, flora and fauna. There should be plenty of cedar trees. There should be a lake. All these things he describes. And very interestingly, later on we find this dream literally coming true. That's a later part of the story. So in his letter to Lala Badri Shah, Swami Vivekananda mentions his wish to found an ashram in the Himalayas, and he expresses this to his savior couple, disciples also. Then we find Swami Vivekananda coming back to India in 1897, and you all know what happened in 1897. The famous lectures from Colombo to Almora, about which we have discussed in one of our earlier talks. So in those lectures, which were the lectures which awakened the sleeping India, the India which was sleeping for the last 1,000 years, it was given a jolt. It was given an electric shock, and India woke up by those fiery words, Agni Mantra of Swami Vivekananda, and India woke up. So in 1897, when Swami Vivekananda returned along with his English disciples, and with the savior couple also was there, they all came back, and the year-long lecture series went on. And in 1898, when Swami Vivekananda, along with his savior couple, when he was in Almora, I'm talking about 1898, at that time, Swami Vivekananda got a very sad news. What was the sad news? The sad news was the passing away of the first editor of Prabuddha Bharat, the magazine which was started by the inspiration of Swami Vivekananda. This magazine had already started in 1896. And in 1898, when Swami Vivekananda was in Almora, he receives this rude shock that the first editor who was looking and managing this magazine from Chennai at that time, this editor had passed away all of a sudden. And the magazine had come to a standstill, and it stopped its publication for 1 month in 1898. So when Swami Vivekananda came to know about it, at that time the savior couple was close to him, he straight away instructed the savior couple that this magazine should be revived. And so saying, he requested them to revive this magazine from Almora itself. And that is how this magazine, Prabuddha Bharat, this magazine was revived in 1898 from Almora. There was a place called Thompson House, which is even now existing. That building is existing just as it was in 1898. Even now it is existing. If you all go to Almora, you can see it. So that was rented at that time, and that is how this great Prabuddha Bharat magazine was revived from Almora, from that rented place called Thompson House. And now, still Swami Vivekananda's wish to have an ashrama was not fulfilled. The Prabuddha Bharat magazine got revived. There, the savior couple, they did the job. But now, in order to fulfill Vivekananda's wish to have an ashrama, the savior couple, along with Swami Sarupananda, who was Swami Vivekananda's disciple, they started hunting for a place in and around the Almora district. And after almost 1 year's hunt, the savior couple, this Captain Savior, along with Swami Sarupananda, they came to a place called Mayavati. That was in 1899. They came across this wonderful place. Today I'm talking to all of you from Mayavati. I'm sitting in Mayavati and talking to all of you. So this place was discovered by the Captain Savior and Swami Sarupananda in 1899. And they found this place to be exactly matching with Swami Vivekananda's description of his center. That this ashram should be 7,000 feet above the sea level. This was Swami Vivekananda's description. And today, this Mayavati is 6,500 feet above the sea level. Swami Vivekananda had described that ashram should be in the midst of cedar trees, devdar trees, flowers, flora and fauna. There should be a lake. There should be a clear view of the mountain peaks. This ashrama is exactly like that. It is really amazing that whatever Swami Vivekananda had visualized and he had expressed in his letter, everything, every single point was found to be fulfilled in this place called Mayavati, exactly as he had visualized. It is amazing how even before he had seen this place, whatever he had visualized had become a reality in 1899. That is how this Advaita Ashrama was founded in 1899, 19 March 1899. Swami Vivekananda's dream center came to be true. It became a reality. Now, this is as far as the story of Advaita Ashrama is concerned. Now, what about its ideology? Swami Vivekananda was very clear about one thing, and that is the uniqueness of Advaita Ashrama. Among all the centers of the Ramakrishna Math and Ramakrishna Mission, Advaita Ashrama stands completely apart. Very unique center. Unique because this is the one center which Swami Vivekananda had dedicated to the practice and preaching of Advaita Vedanta and Advaita Vedanta alone, without the slightest touch of dualism or dualistic mode of life and dualistic mode of worship. Swami Vivekananda had made this point very clear that this center is dedicated to Advaita and Advaita alone. Now we come to a very important point. Now, what is this Advaita Vedanta? A little bit of Advaita Vedanta we all have to understand. Then it becomes clear what was Vivekananda's mission, what was Sri Ramakrishna's mission, and what is the mission of Hindu Sanatana Dharma itself. How it is this ideology which can save the human race from destruction. How it is this ideology which can take the entire human race to the loftiest planes of civilization. No other ideology can do that. Because we have to understand the importance of what Advaita Vedanta is and what it is waiting to do as far as the future of the human race is concerned. So Vivekananda had made one point very clear. He stated that at Mayavati, I'm just reading out his own quotation. Please note this point, it's very beautiful. He says, at Mayavati, attention was to be paid only to the subjective side of religion, such as meditation, individual and collective study of scriptures, shastras, and the practice and teaching of Advaita Vedanta, free from any dualistic weakness or dependence. In quotes, I repeat this quote once again, what he expected. He says at Mayavati, attention was to be paid only to the subjective side of religion, number one, such as meditation, Then individual and collective study of Shastras, scriptures, and then practice and teaching of highest spiritual monism, that is Advaita, free from all dualistic weakness or dependence. Very clear-cut instructions. No association with dualistic mode of worship, no association with dualistic attitude, no association with the dependence which comes from the dualistic outlook towards life and oneself, no association with the weakness which comes from the so-called dualism. These are the very clear-cut instructions which Vivekananda gave. Now, what is Advaita Vedanta is opposite to all these things which I just now told, which is born out of the dualistic view of life and existence. Now, this again will raise certain questions. And what is this dualistic mode of life or dualistic mode of worship, this dualistic drishti, and how it is different from Advaitic drishti and Advaitic way of life? There is some distinction. That is why Swami Vivekananda makes this distinction very clear. In Advaita, there is no place for weakness. There is no place for fear. There is no place for slavishness. There is no place for narrowness. That is the beauty of Advaita. None of these weakening elements can be or possibly have anything to do with the Advaita drishti. Swami Vivekananda wanted our young boys to cultivate this Advaitic drishti. Be bold. Even Sri Ramakrishna gives this instruction in Upadesha. He says, tie this knowledge of Advaita to the corner of your cloth and then do as you please. What a wonderful instruction. Because Sri Ramakrishna himself was the greatest teacher of Advaita, which we shall come to that point a little later. So, we find Swami Vivekananda giving this clear-cut instruction about paying full attention to the practice of Advaita and Advaita alone in the Advaita Ashrama. This point he mentions in his prospectus also, the prospectus which he had written, himself written, for Advaita, this Advaita Ashrama. In this prospectus, there are 2 points. I'm not reading the whole of this prospectus. In fact, we can spend one whole class to understand this prospectus of Advaita Vedanta. Maybe next time, I don't know. If we are meeting again, we can keep that as one subject. Swami Vivekananda's prospectus of Advaita Ashrama. It's a beautiful document. Every sentence can be discussed very carefully to understand what this Advaita Vedanta is. So I'll just read 1 or 2 lines from that prospectus because it is not possible to go through the whole thing. So in that prospectus written by Swami Vivekananda, Swamiji says one beautiful. Actually, Swami Vivekananda is not talking anything of his own. Of course, he is a person who has experienced the Advaita. But all these things which he is talking about, it's all the great dictums of the Upanishads, the Shastras. So one beautiful sentence comes there in Swami Vivekananda's prospectus, where he says, dependence is misery. Independence is happiness. Please note it down. Dependence is misery. Independence is happiness. Sarvam paravasham dukkham. Sarvam atmavasham sukham. This is the dictum of the great rishis of the past. Swami Vivekananda puts that in simple English. The Sanskrit says, Sarvam paravasham dukkham. When we are paravasha, when we are avasha, when we have to depend on somebody, that is misery. When we are independent, when we don't depend on somebody other than one's own higher self. Please note this point. When we don't depend on anything other than one's own higher self, that self-dependence is the cause of limitless and unbroken happiness. Whenever there is a dependence on anything other than one's own self, that is the cause of misery. This is the difference between dualism and non-dualism. This is the difference between Dvaita and Advaita. In Dvaita, you are depending on some entity other than one's own self. And the moment that dependence comes, you are miserable. You have to wait. You have to be at the mercy of somebody else. But in Advaita, you have to have an association, an identity, a change of identity in understanding one's own self from a higher standpoint. This reliance on the higher self, which comes from a different discipline of the mind, it won't come just like that. That's why Vivekananda wanted one place where this discipline will be practiced. He wanted one center where Advaita sadhana has to be done, which facilitates the practice of Advaita sadhana and the preaching of this. That is this center called Advaita Ashrama, where this discipline of relying on one's own higher self is being practiced, or it is expected to be practiced and also preached as much as possible. This was Vivekananda's mission, that he wanted one center which will be dedicated to this and this alone, without the slightest association with the dualistic mode of worship to which we can connect certain factors like weakness and so connected ideas. Vivekananda was merciless about this point. No place for any dualistic weaknesses or superstitions. Here one has to stand on one's own self and self alone. So he says that dependence is misery and independence is happiness. One more sentence I shall read from his prospectus, which is extremely important, where Vivekananda says, this Advaita is the only system which gives unto man complete possession of himself, takes away all his dependence and his associated superstitions, thus making us brave to suffer, brave to do, and in the long run attain to absolute freedom. What a beautiful statement. You all should note it down. Vivekananda says, Advaita is the only in double quotes, in bold. No other system can give us this. Advaita is the only system which gives unto man complete possession of oneself. Just imagine, today we are not in complete possession of oneself. We are dependent on so many things other than one's own self. In fact, we are possessed by so many things which are different from us. They are possessing us. We have no complete possession of one's own self. We are possessed by so many entities which are different from our own self. You may call it God or whatever it is, anything. Even human beings, we are dependent on so many external factors. You're dependent on human beings, you're dependent on things, you're dependent on social situations, all this external dependence. And the final dependent is the highest dependence in the way we can, from the dualistic standpoint, is the dependence on a God whom we see separated from one's own self. That is the highest form of a dependence which we find in the dualistic mode of worship in dualism. So Vivekananda says, Advaita is the only system which gives unto man complete possession of oneself. No more external dependence. That divinity which I am worshipping outside is my own self here, not anywhere outside, not here and there at this place and that place, not after death we go to some heaven to be in touch with that divinity. None of those ideas. That divinity which I am prostrating before, that divinity which I am worshipping is my own higher self. So that is how we get complete possession of one's own self. And this is what Advaita blesses us with. So Advaita is the only system which gives unto man complete possession of oneself and takes off all dependencies and associated superstitions. Such beautiful words. No dependence, no misery, no superstition, bold and brave. This Advaita is meant for the best minds, not for the weak minds. So he says, takes away all dependence and its associated superstitions, thus making us brave to suffer. What a wonderful thing. Sufferings will come. Even for an Advaitin, suffering comes. Suffering is the inseparable part of so-called the embodied existence. Today we are all living in a body. As human beings, we are all embodied. We are having a body, a male body, a female body. As long as we have this embodied existence, suffering is an inseparable part of that existence. Sufferings will come, but when we have this Advaita Drishti towards one's own self, our reliance on our higher self, we will be brave to suffer silently, cheerfully. Nothing can derail us. This is the greatest gift, Sufferings will come. How are we going to face this suffering? The best way and the highest way is this Advaita Drishti, which gives us tremendous courage to face all the ups and downs of life. Thus making us brave to suffer, brave to do. It makes us tremendously brave to act fearlessly, act boldly, and then in the long run to attain absolute freedom. It's a slow and gradual process as we grow in this Advaita Drishti and Advaita Sthiti, this becoming established in Advaita Drishti. As we grow in that direction, slowly our growth culminates in the attainment of absolute freedom. What a wonderful thing it is. This absolute freedom, which is known as moksha, mukti, this is the very goal, the samam banam of the human life. This is the main teaching of the Hindu Sanatana Dharma, that the main purpose of this human life is attainment of mukti. Mukti, mukti, mukti. Freedom, freedom, freedom is the one song of Vedanta. It is the one song of Advaita Vedanta. Swami Vivekananda says, freedom. Presently, we are living a slavish life. We are slaves to so many things, external things. As Vivekananda says, this dependence on external things, dependence of petty objects of pleasures for which human beings literally become mad. As youngsters, you all should know how many kinds of fascinations and attractions and dependences we have. I cannot be without this, I cannot be without that, I cannot be without another person, I want this person, that person, I want money, I cannot be without this. These are all dependences. And when we don't get that, we become miserable. And we become miserable to the extent that our youngsters, they go and take some very fatal steps. We all know this. Now, recently, we have been hearing about the drug addiction in this country. Just imagine, drug addiction. Why this addiction to external things? Drug, to be addicted to drug, just imagine what a pathetic thing it is. I was just reading this, the news which came out recently, how India is being plagued by this disease of drug addiction, especially among the youngsters. This is all that dualistic weaknesses. Because we are thinking that by getting something outside and by enjoying that, we will become happy. Whereas the thing is just the opposite. What you're looking for is nowhere outside, it is inside here. The focus of happiness, the focus of fulfillment, the focus of satisfaction, everything is here inside. It is in your own higher self, nowhere outside. So Advaita Vedanta teaches, give up this slavish dependence. Dependence on this person, this relative, that money, all these petty dependences. Stand on your own feet. That is the teaching of Advaita Vedanta. And this is what actually Vivekananda wanted our youngsters to stand on this highest pedestal and be fearless, be free, be brave to face the ups and downs of life and then work for the good of the country. So this is the great message of Advaita Vedanta, which Swami Vivekananda came to preach 1200 years back. Sri Shankaracharya, who is considered to be the greatest teacher of Advaita Vedanta, he had come. Look into his life. What masterly life. 1200 years back, when India was completely engulfed by darkness, at that time, that great teacher of Advaita comes and he beats the drums of Advaita Vedanta throughout the length and breadth of this land. From Kanyakumari to the Himalayas, he beats the drum of this Advaita Darshana, this Darshana of fearlessness, this Darshana of Mukti, this Darshana of freedom, Mukti. He preaches and India becomes awakened. 1200 years after that, Vivekananda comes and does the same thing. He beats once again this drum of Advaita Vedanta, but this time, this message of Advaita Vedanta is not meant to be limited to the Indian boundaries. It was meant to engulf the entire human race. Today, this message has to go beyond India's boundaries and it has to enlighten the entire human race. That is the main purpose for which Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda have come. And that work is even now going on. It's an old mission, the mission to spiritualize the entire human race by this most strengthening, the most powerful, the most life-giving message. That is Advaita Vedanta. So, my dear students, the subject can be discussed almost endlessly. If time permits and if situation comes, we may discuss this Swami Vivekananda's prospectus, which he had written for this Advaita Ashrama. And that is how this ashrama, let me just wind up this whole talk. So this ashrama, which is founded on this loftiest ideology of the human race, which is known as Advaita Vedanta, the central idea of which is that there is only one divinity. There is nothing separated from this divinity. Let me just tell one more thing before I wind it up, because that point should be made clear in your minds. Sri Shankaracharya very beautifully puts this idea, and it's a very famous utterance which all of us know, but it needs to be reiterated here. What is this Advaita Vedanta? Shankaracharya says in a beautiful equation, Brahma Satyam, Jagan Mithya, Jiva Brahmaiva Napara. One of the greatest presentations of the ultimate reality. Sri Shankaracharya says, Brahman is true. Brahman is what? It is that pure consciousness, Sat, Chit, Ananda, about which the whole of the Vedas speak, and Vedas cannot express it. It is inexpressible. And yet the Vedas' main concern is the Satchidananda Brahma, about which specifically we find discussions in the Upanishads, which is known as Vedanta. So this Brahman, this Satchidananda, Chaitanya, consciousness, is the only thing which is true, number one. And Jagan Mithya, the world, the way we understand the world, please note this point. This world which we are experiencing and our understanding about it and our understanding about our own self, that understanding is mithya, it cannot be true. So what is the correct understanding about the world and our own self? Shankaracharya says, the so-called world and the so-called jiva, our own self, we are nothing but that Brahman. This is the most beautiful articulation of the supreme reality. Shankaracharya says that there is nothing separated from Brahman. What we call as jiva, or a human being, or a living creature, what we call as a world, this world and the jiva is not separated from Brahman. It is one with Brahman. Jiva Brahmaiva, Jagatah Brahmaiva. It's Brahman only. Brahman alone is there. Sri Ramakrishna's life is the living demonstration of this idea. Sri Ramakrishna knew nothing apart from Brahman and divinity. For Sri Ramakrishna, nothing separately existed. Brahman alone existed. This ideology of there being nothing apart from Brahman, this is what is known as Advaita. There is no Dvaita. There is nothing separated from Brahman. There is nothing Brahma Bhinna. There is nothing Atma Bhinna. Everything is Atma Rupa. Everything is Brahma Rupa. This is the supreme truth. And this is what Vivekananda came to preach. This is what Sri Ramakrishna came to demonstrate. And this is the ideology of Advaita Vedanta. And Swami Vivekananda wanted one center exclusively dedicated to the preaching and practicing of this ideology. And he specifically wanted our youngsters, especially this is meant for our young generation. Only youngsters, those who have become old and they have lost their all energies, it is difficult for them to do that. It is for our youngsters who have to take up this ideology as their ideal and live a life of true freedom, a life of true fearlessness, and a life of true courage. That is the ultimate message of this Advaita Vedanta, which Vivekananda came to preach, for which he established this one exclusive center, which is the most unique center of the Ramakrishna Sangha. So before I end, I invite all of you students someday to make a plan with the permission of your Acharya, Swami Shuddhidanandaji. All of you can come on a group tour to Mayavati and spend some days here. With this, I end my talk here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Harry. Advaita Ashrama invite ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೆ. We try to come up with it. Please come quickly. He has such a noble soul with us. Come first. You should be ready for questions before I call. No introduction, just question.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting us, Swamiji, to Mayavati, and we'll surely plan and come one day. My question, Swamiji, according to what Swami Vivekananda told, Advaita Ashrama should be at an altitude of 7,000 or 8,000 feet. So, and it is situated in Mayavati. According to this, if we think that all these online platforms are not there, how could have this reached us? Because that would have been an isolated place, Mayavati.
See, Himalayas has got its own fascination, you know. Himalayas doesn't need any social media for its preaching. Right from the beginning of this creation, I think Himalayas has been doing its own preaching by its own self. That's why spiritual aspirants from all the parts of the world, they always get fascinated and attracted towards the Himalayas. And that is one point. And definitely, when did the social media come, these mediums come? But even before this also, people have been coming to Mayavati for last, now 1899, it is already 122 years old. 122 years old ashram, and it has got a history of having done exemplary seva to the entire human race. Now that is a different part. What has been the contribution of Advaita Ashrama? I'm not touching upon that. The world knows that. The world knows it. Even before the so-called the modern digital social media and this medium came into existence, Advaita Ashrama is very famously known all over the world for the kind of service it has been rendering for the last 122 years.
Thank you so much.
Maharaj, you told that Swami Vivekananda wanted the youth to practice Advaita philosophy. But I think we have understood what Advaita is, but most of us are toddlers to this philosophy. So how do we start with baby steps to follow Advaita and implement that in our life?
It's a very, very nice question. See, in our tradition, there is always a very well, I should say, time-tested certain practices and ways to move in this direction. A time-tested method is to first study the basic principles of Advaita Vedanta from some teacher, just like you all have your Acharya. So the best ways is to learn from one Acharya. As you are in the Gurukulam, I expect that in the Gurukulam there should be regular classes on the Upanishads, not such general lectures. No, not general lectures. Systematic study of the Upanishads, one by one. Study of the Upanishads, if possible, with Shankaracharya's commentary. Brilliant. To clear all the doubts about this great ideology of Advaita, a systematic study is number 1 point. Now, in the absence of this, or for some reasons, if you find that this is not possible in your present setup, the second thing, the best option which we have is to study Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga lectures. Again, let me tell you, it is not that easy. We all have an idea that definitely Swami Vivekananda has presented those ideas in his most wonderful manner, but we have somehow we have been told that it is very easily understandable. No, the subject of Advaita Vedanta itself is not that easy to understand, though Swami Vivekananda has made it as simple as possible. I personally feel that this subject needs to be studied under the guidance of a eligible teacher. Whether you are studying Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga, it should be with the help of a eligible teacher. Whether you are studying Upanishads, the Sanskrit works, the Prakarana Granthas of Sri Shankaracharya, it should be under the guidance of an eligible teacher. Because that association of a teacher is very important. Whether you study Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga or Shankaracharya's works and the Upanishads. This subject itself is so profound. The human being, by himself or herself, will not be able to catch the real drift of that thought. It is extremely sukshma. That's why the Upanishad says, this is Drishyate tu agraya buddhya sukshmaya sukshmadarshiti. This can be caught by agraya buddhya sukshmaya sukshmadarshiti. Sukshmadarshiti, by those who are given to understand sukshma things, very subtle things. But for that you need agraya buddhya, a very focused mind, a very pure buddhi you need. So many things are implied in this question of how to go about it. So we need, if you are really a serious student of Vedanta, then these things are expected. If you are just a casual reader, you can read any book and you think that you know Advaita Vedanta, that is one thing. But if you are a serious aspirant of Advaitic Anubhuti, then you will definitely need to go through this kind of a traditional paramparik paddhati and discipline of studying this Vedanta under the proper guidance of an eligible Acharya. And you are all in the Gurukulam, I expect that it should be that.
Thank you for that answer, Maharaj. I'm translating a question from one of my brothers. His question is that if you say that Advaita is the supreme philosophy, then how far is Dvaita and Vishishadvaita true?
It's a beautiful question. It's a beautiful question. See, it's like, We have ocean, is it not? Just imagine there is an ocean, okay? In that ocean, there are big waves and small waves. Does the ocean exclude these waves, or does it include those waves, big or small? The ocean includes all the waves, is it not? This ocean includes all the waves.
Yes, Maharaj.
None of those waves are outside the ocean. Similarly, this Advaita Bodha is like an ocean in which all the other bigger and smaller waves are all involved. In Advaita Drishti, nothing is rejected. I am talking about the real ideal Advaita Drishti, the Advaita Drishti which is found in the Upanishads, the Advaita Drishti which was propounded by Sri Shankaracharya, the Advaita Drishti of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. In this Advaita Drishti, nothing is rejected. Everything has got its proper place. Vishishta Advaita is true. Advaita is true. They are all like different milestones in the spiritual aspirant's spiritual growth. Nothing is wrong. But the ultimate picture is that in Advaita, that is the final picture, in which nothing is separated from that divinity. Those who are dualists, they won't accept the Advaita Drishti. Those who are qualified monists, so-called Vishishta Advaitins, they will also not fully accept Advaita. But the true Advaitin, he accepts everything. He understands that dualism is also true in its own place, but that is not the final truth. He knows that Vishishta Advaita is also true, but he knows that that is not the final truth. So he gives the proper place to all these different stages of human growth. In Advaita, everything is involved, everything is included, nothing is left out, everything is given its proper place, which Advaitis cannot do it. Vishishta Advaitis also cannot do it. They cannot include Advaita into their system, but a true Advaitin has got that vision in which nothing is left out. That is the real philosophy of human life.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Pranam Maharaj. Following your answer, then does it also apply for all the negatives? Even that comes under Advaita also. But because of Viveka, we discriminate. But technically, it comes under Advaita only, Maharaj.
All negatives means, what do you mean by negatives? Can you slightly elaborate that? What do you mean by negatives? Like
all the evils of the world.
Okay, understood. Fine. You see, the so-called negatives and evils, these negatives and evils which we experience in life, this is all based upon, now we will have to go into the intricacies of Advaita Vedanta. This question is slowly taking us into the deeper aspects of Advaita Vedanta. Evil exists only in ignorance. Negatives exist only in ignorance. Presently, we are all ignorant. In ignorance, the man commits so many evil deeds. He commits so many wrong things. All these things are owing to ignorance. Bhagavad Gita says beautifully, Ajnanena avritam jnanam tena muhyanti jantavaha. It is only owing to ajnana. We don't know our true own real self. That is why we are in trouble. We are associated with all these evils and negativities of life. So, in the beginning, when we are in ajnana, there is a need to be away from these negatives, these evils. We should learn to disassociate ourselves from all the negatives and evils as long as the real knowledge doesn't dawn. When the knowledge dawns, then what we have to do, we need not be told by anyone. Because once the knowledge dawns, you won't be able to do anything wrong. Once you know that you are that Brahman, then it is impossible for that person to do anything wrong. So this association with the evil and the negativities, it is only in the state of ignorance. And when we are ignorant, remember, my dear children, you should disassociate consciously, voluntarily. You should disassociate, disconnect with all evil things of life. That is a must. Without disassociating, disconnecting, and disengaging yourselves with the evils of life, you cannot move towards this great experience of Brahman. So this subtle understanding you should have. Now, Advaita, where there is nothing but that one reality, doesn't mean that it doesn't give you a license to do whatever you want. No, it's not like that. If you are really a jnani, you won't be it is not, then all the evil elements and tendencies are gone for once and forever. You cannot. That is the conclusion of that. But before that kind of a state of mind comes into our personality, we have to voluntarily and consciously keep ourselves away and safeguard ourselves from all such negativities and evil elements.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Any other question? Anyone? Yeah? Huh? Niranjan? Govinda? Narayana? Vamshi?
There is a very famous story which Swami Vivekananda tells, Today I'm not going to narrate that story because that will take a long time. But just something like the famous Swamiji's that lion cub, Hari the lion story. You can find it in Swamiji's works. Hari the lion. Beautifully. So how we are all, lions. We are all Advaitic lions. But we don't know. That is why we bleat like sheep. Swami Vivekananda says, we are bleating like sheep. We behave like fearful sheep. Whereas our true nature, Swami Vivekananda says, we are all lions. We are all lions. That is what Advaita gives us. Anyway, this is just a hint. You can read the story if you get time.
Yes, Maharaj. Swamiji will explain that story after this session.
Yes.
Thank you, Maharaj, for putting a light on our fellow brothers, and we assure that we will follow your thoughts and try to understand Advaita Vedanta. And also again express my heartfelt thanks to you, Maharaj. Thank you. And we conclude this session with a prayer.
सर्वयज्ञेश्वरो हरि तस्मिन् सृष्टे जगद्दुष्टं प्रीणितं जगत् हरि ओम तत्सत् श्रीरामकृष्णार्पणमस्तु.
No, in Advaita Ashrama, we don't say Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. That's why I was keeping quiet. We just say Om here, Om. Here there is no Arpana. There is no Arpana to something else. Here it is, everything is Brahma Arpana. Brahma Arpana, Brahma. Brahmarno Brahmana Hutam, Brahmaiva Tena Gantavyam, Brahma Karma Samadhi. Here everything is Brahma Arpanam.
These are the few slides which we are sharing with our students, Swamiji.
Yes.
At least something of Advaita Ashrama which they can really perceive. This is a publication center in Kolkata. The previous. This is the building where Kolkata Center Publication House resides. These are the cover page of one of the issues. Today's was a very daring step because the loftiest idea which Vivekananda wanted to teach every child, that was the attempt which we have tried. But somewhere the journey has to begin. I am very, very happy that you took the lead and leading our boys to think on those lines. I feel in days to come, with the new education policies setting in, there will be a place for study of philosophies also. I am sure many boys will opt, Maharaj, because now gradually their minds are opening up. I find many boys personally, they come and ask about not just the ordinary meditation, what is Buddhistic meditation, what is Advaitic meditation. I myself was surprised from where this kind of questions are coming. But all this knowledge is power session has triggered this kind of thought process in their mind, Maharaj. Thank you very much once again for daring to handle such a difficult subject, but you made it very simple and palpable for us, Maharaj. I am sure our boys' journey will begin, Maharaj. Hari Om.
Hari Om.